Accepting responsibility is the foundation for living an effective life. It helps you see reality objectively, it helps you assess risks accurately, and it helps you face your life circumstances honestly. It's really the starting point for taking action. If you're blaming others for the circumstances of your life, for those problems, then you're really just taking a victim approach to dealing with those. Rather, what we're advocating here and see that's important is to accept responsibility for your problems, for those circumstances, so that you can live your life more as a warrior. We'll examine this topic through a story in Carlos Castaneda's book, Journey to Ixtlan. Don Juan is Carlos's teacher, and the story is about a young man on his journey toward accepting the consequences of his choices. Before we get into the story, I want to outline qualities of accepting responsibility. There's value in the words themselves. Accepting responsibility is literally your ability to respond. So as you increase your accepting responsibility, you increase your ability to respond to the circumstances of your life. Now, there's certain qualities that increase your ability to accept responsibility. These qualities are awareness, three phases of risk-taking, preparation, choice, and action. We'll look at these qualities again after the story. Once upon a time there was a young man, a destitute Indian who lived among the white men in a city. He had no home, no relatives, no friends. He had come into the city to find his fortune and had found only misery and pain. From time to time he made a few cents working like a mule, barely enough for a morsel. Otherwise he had to beg or steal food. The young man went to the marketplace. He walked up and down the street in a haze, his eyes wild upon seeing all the good things that were gathered there. He was so frantic that he did not see where he was walking and ended up tripping over some baskets and falling on top of an old man. The old man was carrying 4 enormous gourds and had just sat down to rest and eat. The old man found it quite strange that the young man had stumbled on him. He was not angry at being disturbed, but amazed at why this particular young man had fallen on top of him. The young man, on the other hand, was angry and told him to get out of his way. He was not concerned at all about the ultimate reason for their meeting. He had not noticed that their paths had actually crossed. The old man's gourds had turned over and were rolling down the street. When the young man saw the gourds, he thought he had found his food for the day. He helped the old man up and insisted on helping him carry the heavy gourds. The old man told him that he was on his way to his home in the mountains, and the young man insisted on going with him at least part of the way. So they proceeded along the road to the mountains. The young man was curious about the contents of the gourds, so he asked, "What do you carry in these gourds?" The old man did not answer, but told him that he was going to show him a companion or friend who could alleviate his sorrows and give him advice and wisdom about the ways of the world. The old man summoned the most beautiful deer that the young man had ever seen. The deer was so tame that it came to him and walked around him. It glittered and shone. The young man was spellbound and knew right away that it was a spirit deer. The old man told him then that if he wished to have that friend and its wisdom, all he had to do was let go of the gourds. The young man's petty desires were pricked upon hearing such a request. The young man again asked, "What do you have in these 4 enormous gourds?" The old man very sternly replied that he was carrying food and water. The young man walked in a circle, deliberating what to do. He calculated that if the old man, who was obviously a wizard, was willing to give a spirit deer for his gourds, then the gourds must have been filled with power beyond belief. The young man declared that he wanted to have the gourds. "What happened to the young man?" asked Carlos. "He took the gourds," replied Don Juan. "He took them and ran away to an isolated place and opened them." "What did he find? Were the gourds empty?" asked Carlos. "There was only food and water inside the gourds, and the young man, in a fit of anger, smashed them against the rocks," replied Don Juan. "His reaction was only natural," said Carlos. Then Don Juan explained the lesson of responsibility. The young man had not taken responsibility for his decision. Therefore he was angered by his blunder. He expected to gain something and got nothing instead. Had he been aware of his decision and assumed responsibility for it, he would have taken the food and would have been more than satisfied with it. And perhaps he might even have realized that the food was power too. The young man didn't accept the consequences of his poor choice. But he made the choice, not someone else. It was his greed, expecting something more in those gourds than a spirit deer, that influenced his choice and led to that outcome. And there are always two outcomes to your choices. You're going to achieve the goal that you set for yourself, or you'll suffer the consequences. Well, the young man was not interested in the second part. He was only interested in achieving his goal, getting something more than the spirit deer. If he would accept both outcomes, the goal or the consequences, then he would have been happy with at least food and water being in those gourds. If he would have accepted both outcomes, then he would have been able to examine his motivation and how greed could influence his choice in a negative way. And this is a perfect way for him to be able to examine himself, do some self-inquiry work. Accepting responsibility for your choices has certain qualities that heighten the use of your attention. Now, I listed these at the outset of this lesson, and they include awareness and the 3 phases of risk-taking. I'm going to go through them again here as a practice tip so you can see how to apply them to your life. Here's the drill. Awareness. Notice. The first step is always awareness. Notice when you shirk responsibility by blaming others for your circumstances. Pause. Pausing extends your awareness and diminishes your reaction. 3 phases of risk-taking. Preparation. Acknowledge. What part did you play in creating the situation? Was it poor decision-making? Was it greedy motivation? Did you avoid accepting the consequences? Accept. Now, accept the reality of the situation as it is. This is your starting point for taking effective action. Lookings. Look into the situation. Complete preparation includes the goal, the consequences, and your plan. Understand all 3 as clearly as you can. Choice. Choices are binary. They force you to decide on one course of action. Choosing one course means you cut away all other options. Be willing to suffer the consequences of your choice. Action. Respond. Take action by executing your plan. You'll create another outcome from this choice. Either you'll achieve the goal or suffer the consequences. Accept either outcome. Repeat. Awareness and the 3 phases of risk-taking give a complete understanding of reality and how to act in it. That doesn't leave anything out. It includes everything so that you can respond as a warrior instead of reacting as a victim.